For a decade, I wasn't just an employee at the Sutton Hotel, I was its soul. My name is Thalia, and I was the curator, the guardian, the storyteller for what many considered to be the finest restaurant wine cellar in the country. It was more than a collection, it was a liquid library of moments, of risks taken, of relationships forged in dusty basements and sun-drenched vineyards across the world. Each bottle had a history, and I knew them all by heart. The cellar was my life's work, a multi-million-dollar testament to a belief that wine is not about an asset class, but about geography, history, and humanity in a glass. It was a legend, and I was its keeper. But legends don't show up on a balance sheet. That's what he told me. Not in so many words, but his every action screamed it. His name was Reese. He was the new face of the corporate monolith that had acquired the Sutton, a man who wore ambition like a cheap, tight suit. He walked through my cellar not with reverence, but with the cold, dead eyes of an accountant scanning for inefficiencies. He saw vintages as depreciation schedules and terroir as a line item under marketing. He couldn't tell a Burgundy from a Bordeaux, but he knew the precise profit margin on both. To him, I was the biggest inefficiency of all. I was experienced, and therefore expensive. I was principled, and therefore difficult. So he replaced me. The news came not in a meeting, not with a handshake and a hollow thank you for your service, but in the form of a calendar invite for a transition meeting. I walked into the conference room to see him sitting there, a smug little smile playing on his lips, next to a kid who couldn't have been more than 24. The kid had a trendy haircut and an influencer's portfolio, but the terrified look in his eyes told me he knew he was out of his depth. He was cheaper. That was his only qualification. Reese explained that my role was being restructured for greater synergy with corporate's Q3 profitability goals. It was the kind of language designed to strip the humanity out of an execution. Then came the final, exquisite humiliation. As my final task, Reese said, he needed me to catalog the entire collection, every last bottle. It was for an insurance valuation, a necessary step before they could leverage the asset for a new line of credit. He needed my expertise one last time to quantify the very thing he was discarding. He was so proud of his cleverness, of wringing one last drop of value from the lemon he was about to throw away. He handed me a tablet and a barcode scanner. He never even looked me in the eye. What he didn't know, what he never bothered to check, was that I had built this cellar on a foundation of my own design. Years ago, when the original owner, a wonderful man who understood passion, first hired me, we negotiated a unique contract. He saw my dedication, the way I was pouring my life into his hotel, and he wanted to protect it. He wanted to protect me. Buried deep in the legalese of the original acquisition contracts, the ones Reese's team of cheap lawyers had clearly just skimmed, was a little section I'd drafted myself. My lawyer at the time called it audacious. I called it a parachute. We named it the Provenance Clause. It's a simple piece of text, really. It states that in the event of my termination without cause, the ownership of any bottle I had personally sourced, negotiated and acquired directly from the vineyard or its original private owner, reverts to me. It was my intellectual property, my relationships, made tangible in glass and liquid. And Reese, in his infinite spreadsheet-driven wisdom, had just fired me to improve a quarterly earnings report. He had no cause, only a calculator. So as I stood there taking the tablet from his hand, I gave him a small, quiet smile. He mistook it for defeat. It wasn't. It was the starting pistol for the single greatest heist in the history of fine wine. He thought I was cataloging his treasure. I was preparing my severance package, and tomorrow morning, the moving trucks are arriving to collect it. If you've ever poured your heart and soul into something, only to have someone try and erase your name from the page, then you know what I'm about to do isn't about revenge. It's about reclamation. Stick with me, and I'll tell you how I did it. And if this story resonates with you, hit that like button and let me know in the comments. It helps to know I'm not the only one who believes that some things are worth more than what's on the price tag. The door to the cellar clicked shut behind me, the sound swallowed by the cool, damp silence. It was a sound I knew better than my own heartbeat. For 10 years that click was the start of my day. a transition from the noisy world above to the quiet, breathing world below. Tonight it was a final punctuation mark. The air was thick with the familiar, sacred smells of wet stone, old oak, and the faint, sweet ghost of vintages long past. This wasn't just a basement, it was a sanctuary. It was my sanctuary, and I had just been excommunicated. I didn't turn on the main lights. I didn't need to. My feet knew the path through the labyrinthine racks. My hands knew where to find the low-wattage work lamps. I flicked one on, and a soft, golden glow illuminated a small section of burgundy. The bottles lay on their sides, patient and sleeping. My children. That's what I called them, sometimes jokingly to visitors, but always seriously in the quiet of my own heart. I ran my fingers over the dusty shoulder of a 1999 Latache. I remembered the day it arrived, the almost religious reverence with which we uncrated it. I remembered the fight to acquire it. My body started to shake. The professional composure I had maintained in that sterile conference room, the mask of calm acceptance I had worn, as Reese dismissed a decade of my life, finally cracked. A sob, sharp and ugly, tore from my throat. I pressed my forehead against the cool, rough stone of the wall, the tiny crystals of mineral deposits biting into my skin. The tears came then, hot and furious. They weren't just for the job, for the humiliation. They were for the betrayal of the place itself. Reese wasn't just firing me. He was desecrating a temple. He was turning this living library into a warehouse. The thought of my replacement, that terrified child, with the trendy haircut, who thought DRC was a financial acronym, touching these bottles, handling them without understanding, without respect. It was a physical pain. It felt like a violation. I sank to the floor, my back against a rack of ancient Madeiras, and let the grief wash over me. It wasn't about the money. It was never about the money. It was about the story. Each bottle was a chapter, and in that moment, the chapters of my own story began to unspool in the darkness. I remembered being 28, full of fire, and a ridiculous, almost arrogant belief in my own palate. I had just left a junior sommelier position at a stuffy, old guard club, where my suggestions were politely ignored, in favor of whatever the senior men had been drinking for 30 years. I'd heard that the Sutton, then a respected but slightly faded Grand Hotel, was looking to build something special. I met the owner, Arthur Sutton, in the space that would become the Cellar. It was just a damp, forgotten basement then, filled with broken furniture and cobwebs. But I saw the bones of it. I saw the potential. Arthur was a man in his late 60s, with kind eyes and hands that were still rough from a youth spent working in his family's original tavern. He didn't know much about wine, but he knew everything about passion. I didn't have a long resume. I had a vision. I spent 2 hours talking, not about price points or inventory management, but about terroir, about stories, about creating a wine program that would be an experience, not just a list. I told him I didn't want to just buy wine. I wanted to source it, to build relationships with the growers, to bring their stories back to our guests. He listened, nodding slowly. When I was done, breathless and sure I'd overstepped, he just smiled. He said, "My grandfather used to say the best whiskey is the one with the best story. I think you'll do just fine, Thalia." He gave me a budget that made his accountants blanch, and a level of autonomy that was unheard of in the industry. He trusted me, and I spent the next decade proving that trust was well placed. My mind drifted to a specific trip, about 6 years ago. It was for a small batch Pinot Noir, from a tiny, almost mythical vineyard in the Sonoma coast. The winemaker, a man named Silas, was notoriously difficult. He was a third-generation farmer who hated wine people. He thought we were all charlatans who talked about notes of leather and tobacco, but didn't know the first thing about the soil. He refused to sell to restaurants or distributors. He sold his entire minuscule production to a short, private list of people he deemed worthy. Getting on that list was harder than getting a table at the French Laundry. I didn't call. I didn't email. I flew to California, rented a car, and drove up a winding, unpaved road to his farm. He met me at the gate, with a shotgun crooked in his arm and a scowl on his face. He told me to get lost. I didn't leave. I told him I wasn't there to buy his wine. I was there to understand it. I asked if I could work for a day. He stared at me for a long, hard minute, then spat on the ground and pointed toward a field of vines that needed pruning. "Shears are in the barn," he grunted. I spent the entire day working alongside him and his small crew, my hands getting raw, my back aching. I didn't talk about wine. I talked about the weather, about the blight that had hit the region 2 years prior, about the cost of new trellises. At the end of the day, filthy and exhausted, he poured me a glass of his wine from a ceramic jug. It was sublime. It tasted of the fog, the sun, the red earth. It was a story in a glass. He looked at my hands, calloused and dirty. He said, "You can have 2 cases a year. Don't ever tell anyone I did this." That wine became a quiet legend at the Sutton. Only I knew the story of how it got there. It was personally sourced. It was mine. Then my thoughts turned to Leo. He'd arrived 2 years ago, fresh out of a sommelier program, full of textbook knowledge, but with a palpable, desperate hunger to learn more. He reminded me of myself at his age. He was earnest, respectful, and deeply in love with wine. I saw the spark in him. Reese and his corporate ilk would have seen him as cheap labor, someone to run bottles and polish glasses. I saw a successor, not to replace me, but to continue the tradition. I took him under my wing. I let him taste the great bottles. I taught him what the books don't. I taught him that the story of the wine is as important as its rating. I explained why a small producer champagne made with heart could be more profound than a famous big-name brand. He was a sponge. He absorbed everything. He was loyal. He was my friend. The thought of him now, left alone to deal with a boss like Reese, made my stomach clench with a fresh wave of anger. He was the one who had texted me just an hour ago, a message that had solidified my resolve. He wrote, "Reese just came down to the cellar." He pointed at a magnum of 1982 Lafite and asked if we could put it on tap to reduce spoilage. I think he was serious. "I am so sorry, Thalia." Putting a first-growth Bordeaux on tap, the sheer, breathtaking ignorance of it was almost beautiful in its purity. It was like asking if you could microwave a Rembrandt to see the colors better. That text, more than the firing, more than the humiliation, was the catalyst. It was the final piece of evidence that this wasn't just a business decision. It was an act of barbarism. My grief, which had been a wild, hot flood, began to cool and harden. It receded, leaving behind something cold, dense, and sharp. It left behind purpose. I sat there in the dark for another hour, the ghosts of my past swirling around me. I remembered the long, late-night negotiations with Arthur Sutton over the terms of my employment. It was during our 3rd year. The Cellar was already gaining national attention. Offers from other hotels were starting to come in, quiet feelers sent through industry friends. I was loyal to Arthur, but I was also a realist. I had seen too many chefs and sommeliers build empires for others, only to be cast aside when management changed or budgets were cut. Their life's work, their relationships, their intellectual capital, all absorbed by the corporation, while they were left with a severance check and a non-compete clause. So I went to Arthur with a proposal. We were in his office, a comfortable wood-paneled room that smelled of leather and old books. I laid out my case. "Arthur," I said, "this cellar is becoming a significant asset. Its value isn't just in the bottles, but in the curation, in the relationships that allow us to acquire them. That's my contribution. It's intangible, but it's the most valuable part." He nodded. "I agree." "So," I continued, taking a breath, "I want to protect that, not just for my sake, but for the integrity of what we're building. I want to add a clause to my contract." I slid a piece of paper across his desk. It was a draft my lawyer, Anya, had helped me write. It was the provenance clause. Arthur read it slowly, his brow furrowed. It was an unusual request, unprecedented, even. It fundamentally challenged the nature of corporate ownership. It said that my work, my direct efforts, could create an asset the company didn't truly own, but merely held in trust so long as I was the steward. He read it a second time. I held my breath, expecting a negotiation, a refusal. Instead, he looked up at me and smiled that warm, genuine smile. "Thalia," he said, "any owner who would fire you without a damn good reason is an idiot who doesn't deserve this cellar anyway." He picked up his pen. "It seems perfectly fair to me." He signed it, and we had the corporate lawyers integrate it into my official employment agreement. It was a gentleman's agreement, codified in ironclad legalese, a testament to a time when business was done between people, not between entities. When the corporate acquisition happened last year, after Arthur had passed away, I knew this day might come. His children, who had no interest in the hotel business, sold to the highest bidder. And in came Reese and his team, with their talk of synergy and optimization. I watched them. I listened in meetings. I saw how they operated. They never once asked about the seller's philosophy. They only asked for its valuation. I knew they saw me as a relic of a bygone era, an expensive, sentimental line item. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that they had never ever read the fine print. People like Reese never do. They assume the paperwork is just a formality. They assume the power is all on their side. They sign things. They don't read them. Sitting there on the cold stone floor, the plan that had been a theoretical parachute became a tangible operational blueprint. The cataloging wasn't a humiliation. It was an opportunity. It was Reese, in his arrogance, handing me the very tool I needed to execute the clause. He wanted a list for his insurance company. Fine, I would give him a list, but I would make another list for myself, a manifest, a bill of lading for my own liberation. The grief was gone now. The sadness had burned away. In its place was a quiet, humming energy, a cold, clear focus. It wasn't about revenge. I kept telling myself that. It was about justice. It was about proving that a person's life's work cannot be reduced to a number on a spreadsheet and then discarded. It was about honoring the promise Arthur Sutton and I had made to each other in that quiet, wood-paneled office. The promise that passion has a value that transcends profit. I got to my feet, my joints stiff from the cold floor. I walked to the light switch and flipped on the main overheads. The cellar, my cellar, flooded with bright, functional light. It was no longer a sanctuary. It was a battlefield, and I was about to draw the map. The next morning, I walked into the cellar with a new sense of purpose. It felt different. The air, usually so full of sleeping potential, now crackled with a quiet electricity. Reese had given me a deadline, 5 days to catalog over 10,000 bottles. It was a monumental task, one he probably thought would be a miserable, soul-crushing slog. He wasn't wrong about the scale, but he was dead wrong about my state of mind. This wasn't a chore. It was a treasure hunt where I already owned the map. The first thing I did was call Anya, my lawyer. She's a shark in a world of guppies, a woman whose mind is as sharp as a shard of glass. I got her on her cell as she was walking into a courthouse. "Thalia," she said, her voice brisk. "Don't tell me. The spreadsheet jockey finally did it." "He did," I said, a small smile touching my lips. "Fired me for synergy, and his final request. He wants me to catalog the cellar for his insurance valuation." There was a pause on the line, and then Anya let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a sound of pure, predatory delight. "Oh, that is rich. That is poetry. He's literally paying you to assemble the evidence against him. Did you get the termination in writing?" "An email," I confirmed. "No cause cited, just a lot of corporate jargon about restructuring." "Perfect," she purred. "That's all we need." "The clause is ironclad, Thalia. The language is unambiguous. Personally sourced is defined as any acquisition where you were the lead negotiator, documented by your travel expenses, email correspondence, or purchase orders signed by you. Termination without cause is a gift. It's clean. He has no wiggle room. So we're good to go." "We're better than good," Anya said. "Let him think you're working for him." Do the job. Be meticulous. Create 2 sets of records, one for him, one for us. When you're done, send me your list. I'll handle the official notice. Just tell me when the trucks are arriving. The morning after I finish the inventory, I said. He wants the report on his desk by Friday evening. The trucks will be here Saturday at 8 a.m. I'll have a courier waiting at the hotel for him. Friday at 5:01 p.m. With the legal notice and a copy of his own contract, Anya said, savoring the thought. He'll have a fun weekend. We hung up and a weight I didn't even know I was carrying lifted. The legal foundation was secure. Now came the logistics. I looked at the tablet and the barcode scanner Reese had given me. It was linked to the hotel's new corporate-approved inventory system, a clunky, soulless piece of software. I would use it, of course. I would do the job he was paying me for. But my real work would be done with a small leather-bound notebook and a set of specialized archival pens, and I had an inside man. That afternoon, during his lunch break, Leo met me in the cellar. His face was a mixture of anger on my behalf and fear for his own future. I can't believe he did this, Thalia, he whispered, his eyes scanning the cellar door as if Reese might burst in at any moment. I said calmly. Men like Reese don't build things, Leo. They just acquire them. There's a difference. I sat him down at the small tasting table in the center of the cellar and laid out the plan. I showed him a copy of my contract, pointing to the provenance clause. His eyes went wide as he read it. A slow smile spread across his face. No way, he breathed. This is real. As real as the floor under our feet, I said. But I need your help. You're going to be my eyes and ears after I'm gone. I need to know how he reacts. I need to know what their lawyers say. But most importantly, for the next few days, I need you to run interference. Keep Reese and his questions out of this cellar. Tell him I need absolute concentration, that any interruption could corrupt the data for his precious insurance. Use his own corporate speak against him. Leo nodded, his expression hardening from worried apprentice to willing co-conspirator. Consider it done, he said, his voice firm. He wants to talk about optimizing workflows. I'll give him a 2-hour presentation on the optimal workflow for polishing glassware. He won't come within 50 feet of this door. With my allies in place, I began the work. The next 5 days were a blur of focused, intensive labor. It was an emotional and physical marathon. I started in the burgundy section, the heart of the collection. I would take a bottle from the rack, its weight familiar in my hands. First, I would scan its existing barcode with Reese's tablet. The screen would flash green, and the bottle's details, the ones the hotel had on file, would pop up. I would confirm them, adding the market valuation data I had researched. That was for his list, the official record. Then the real work began. I'd set the tablet aside and open my leather notebook. I'd turn the bottle over and look for the tiny, almost invisible mark on the back label. It was a system I developed years ago, a tiny dot, made with a specific archival ink, in one of 4 colors, applied just below the vintage year. Green meant I had sourced it directly from the vineyard. Blue meant it came from a private collector I had personally negotiated with. Red meant it was part of a vertical, a complete set of consecutive vintages that I had assembled over years. A black dot meant it was general stock, acquired through standard distributors. It was a code only I understood. I picked up a bottle of 1993 Domaine de la Romanée Conti, a wine so rare it felt like holding a holy relic. I scanned it for Reese, then I turned it over, a tiny green dot. I remembered the trip to Vosne-Romanée, the hours spent with Aubert de Vallon, talking not about allocations, but about the philosophy of the soil. That conversation was what earned me a place on their distribution list. That bottle wasn't just wine. It was a memory. It was proof of a relationship. It was mine. I wrote its details in my notebook. DRC, La Tâche, 1993. 12 bottles. Provenance, direct from domain. I moved through the racks, my movements economical and precise. It was a dance I had done 1,000 times, but this time it had a different rhythm. It was a farewell tour, and a strategic inventory, a funeral and a coronation all at once. Each bottle with a green or blue dot was a story. A 1982 Screaming Eagle, bought from a tech billionaire in Silicon Valley, who was liquidating his collection after a messy divorce. I remembered talking him down from an outrageous price by bonding over a shared love for obscure science fiction novels. Blue Dot. It was mine. An entire vertical of Chateau d'Yquem from 1945 to 2001, an achievement that had taken me 8 years to assemble, piece by piece, from auctions and private sales across Europe. Red dot on every bottle, all of it, mine. With each entry in my notebook, the scale of what I was doing became clearer. This wasn't a few trophy bottles. This was the core, the soul, the beating heart of the entire collection. I was reclaiming entire sections of the cellar, the best of Burgundy, the rarest cult Cabernets from Napa, the ancient fortified wines from Portugal, the boutique grower champagnes that the critics were just starting to discover. I was leaving Reese the commodity wines, the big names that anyone with enough money could buy from a catalog, the interchangeable, soulless bottles. I was taking the history. I was taking the art. By my calculation, about 60% of the cellar's total volume, and close to 85% of its monetary value, fell under the provenance clause. The number was staggering. It was a multi-million-dollar severance package, far more than I had ever anticipated. The clause, once a simple shield, had become a sword. On the third day, Leo proved his worth. Reese, growing impatient, had come down to the restaurant level, demanding an update. As Leo later recounted to me, he intercepted him by the kitchens. "Mr. Reese," Leo said, his face a perfect mask of professional concern. "I'm so glad I caught you. I was hoping to get your input on the Q3 stemware attrition analysis. I've compiled a deck with some preliminary data, and I think we can achieve some real synergy by re-evaluating our breakage protocols." He then proceeded to talk, without pause, for 45 minutes about the chemical composition of different detergents and their effect on crystal clarity. Reese, his eyes glazed over, eventually made an excuse about a conference call and fled back to his office. He didn't come near the cellar again. On Friday afternoon, at 4:45 p.m., I finished. The last bottle, a 1961 Hermitage La Chapelle, was scanned and logged, green dot. It went into my notebook. I looked around the cellar. It looked the same. The racks were still full. To any outside observer, nothing had changed. But I knew better. I had performed a silent and visible coup. I had separated the wheat from the chaff, the treasure from the inventory. I uploaded the final file to the hotel server and sent Reese a short, professional email. "Mr. Reese, the cellar inventory and valuation is complete and has been uploaded as requested. The file is attached. Regards, Thalia." I packed my small bag of personal effects, my notebook, my pens, a favorite corkscrew. I took one last look around, a wave of melancholy washing over me. This place had been my life, but it wasn't mine anymore. Its soul was about to be moved to a new home. I walked out of the cellar, the click of the lock echoing behind me. This time, it didn't sound like a beginning or an end. It sounded like a fuse being lit. I didn't go home. I went to a small quiet bar a few blocks from the hotel and ordered a glass of Sancerre. At 5:02 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was a text from Anya. "Courier has delivered the package. The Eagle has landed." I took a slow sip of my wine. The first move was made. Now, all I had to do was wait for the screaming to start. The silence lasted for exactly 17 minutes. At 5:19 p.m., my phone began to vibrate violently against the polished wood of the bar. The screen lit up with Reese's name. I looked at it, a cold, calm satisfaction spreading through my chest. I let it ring. He was a man who valued efficiency. I was sure he appreciated a prompt response. After 4 rings, it went to voicemail. 30 seconds later, it started ringing again. I silenced it and placed the phone face down on the bar. The quiet hum of the bar's atmosphere, the clinking of glasses, the low murmur of conversation. It was the perfect soundtrack for the beginning of Reese's nightmare. I could picture the scene perfectly, and Leo's breathless text messages over the next hour painted the picture in vivid color. He got the package, laughed at first, tossed it on his desk, said she's trying to sue me. A minute later, he's reading it now. His face has gone completely white, like sheet of paper white, and then he's calling legal. He's yelling. He keeps saying, "Read it again. That can't be what it says." Reese, the man of spreadsheets and bottom lines, was now face to face with a variable he had never thought to calculate. My foresight, his world was built on the assumption of other people's powerlessness. He operated in a system where employees were disposable assets, and contracts were weapons to be used against them, not by them. The idea that I, a sommelier, had embedded a self-destruct code into the very foundation of his prized asset was something his linear, arrogant mind simply couldn't process. According to Leo, the hotel's on-site legal counsel, a young, overwhelmed woman who was used to dealing with slip-and-fall claims, was in a full-blown panic. She had pulled up the original acquisition files, and there it was, in black and white, signed not only by me and Arthur Sutton, but countersigned by the corporate entity during the buyout. It was a legally binding part of the company's own property. Reese had apparently slammed his fist on the desk, shouting, "Why wasn't this flagged?" The poor lawyer could only stammer that it was considered an HR matter, a unique personal services agreement, not a lien on the asset itself. They had missed it. In their rush to quantify the seller's value, they had never bothered to qualify its ownership. The next text from Leo was the best one. "He's trying to get into the cellar. His key card isn't working." Anya, in her beautiful, brutal efficiency, had included in the legal notice a demand for the preservation of assets pending ownership verification. She had cited a specific, if slightly obscure, legal precedent regarding disputed intellectual and physical property. To prevent any accidental breakage or movement of the bottles on my list, she had a court clerk issue a temporary restraining order, effective immediately. The notice informed Reese that any attempt to access or move the specified items would be considered contempt of court. As part of the filing, she had the hotel's security system provider remotely deactivate his and every other executive's access to the cellar. Only my key card, and now Leo's, would work. Reese was locked out of his own vault. I finished my Sancerre, ordered another, and sat back, letting the chaos unfold from a comfortable distance. The phone rang again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize. The hotel's corporate headquarters in Chicago. I let it ring. They could talk to Anya. She was being paid handsomely to absorb their panic for them. The beauty of the plan was its quietness. There was no shouting match, no dramatic confrontation. I wasn't kicking down his door. I was simply enforcing a contract he had inherited. I was using the system, his system, against him. The power of bureaucracy, which he wielded like a club, was now a cage he had built for himself. He was trapped in a prison of his own negligence. The next morning, I arrived at the Sutton at 7:45 a.m. The air was crisp, the sky a pale, early morning blue. Two large, pristine white trucks were already parked at the loading bay. They were from a high-end logistics company that specialized in moving fine art and wine. Their branding was discreet, professional. Their men, dressed in clean, dark uniforms, were waiting quietly. They looked less like movers and more like a tactical team. I was holding a clipboard with my list, the manifest. As I walked toward the loading bay, the hotel's main doors burst open, and Reese came storming out. He looked terrible. His suit was rumpled, his tie was askew, and his face was pale and puffy. He hadn't slept. "Thalia," he yelled, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and desperation. "What do you think you're doing? You can't do this." I stopped and looked at him, my expression calm, neutral. "Good morning, Reese," I said, my voice even. "I'm not doing anything. I'm simply overseeing the transfer of my personal property." "Your property," he sputtered, waving a piece of paper that I recognized as Anya's letter. "This is a joke. This is hotel property. This is grand larceny. Is it? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Your own contract seems to disagree, as I believe, does the temporary injunction from the court. You should be careful, Reese. The men you have watching us, I gestured subtly to the two stone-faced hotel security guards standing awkwardly nearby, are legally obligated to prevent you from interfering. I'd hate for this to get any more unpleasant than it already is. His face went from white to a blotchy, furious red. He was a man accustomed to power, to having his orders followed without question, to be rendered completely impotent, on his own turf, by a woman he had fired, was more than he could bear. He looked from me to the trucks, to the stoic movers who were now watching him with detached professionalism. He was cornered. You're destroying this restaurant, he hissed, lowering his voice to a venomous whisper. You're gutting it. For what? Spite. I allowed myself a small, cold smile. It wasn't about revenge, Reese, I said, echoing the line I had been telling myself. It was about provenance. You, of all people, should understand the importance of a clear chain of ownership. You valued the spreadsheet, remember. This is just the final tally. I turned my back on him then, a gesture of dismissal, more profound than any insult, and walked over to the lead mover. All right, I said, tapping my clipboard. Let's begin. We'll start with the burgundy aisle, rack 7. The movers nodded and began to wheel in their specialized padded trolleys. I walked with them to the cellar entrance, used my still-active key card, and the lock clicked open. As I stepped inside, I glanced back. Reese was still standing there in the parking lot, a solitary, rumpled figure, watching as his multi-million-dollar asset began to walk out the door. The spreadsheet was being liquidated, one case at a time, and he was powerless to stop it. The process was slow, methodical, and devastatingly efficient. For the next 8 hours, the quiet, professional movers transported my life's work from the cool, dark cellar into the climate-controlled security of their trucks. I stood at the cellar entrance with my clipboard, checking off each case against my private manifest. Each box was a memory, a victory. The Silas Vineyards Pinot Noir, whose acquisition had required more diplomacy than a peace treaty. The vertical of Requiem, a monument to patience. The cases of Romani Conti, the crown jewels. They were all there. They were all coming home. Leo was a silent, supportive presence. He shuttled back and forth, ensuring the movers had clear pathways, his face a mask of practiced neutrality whenever a panicked-looking hotel manager scurried past. He was witnessing the dismantling of an empire and the birth of a new one. Around noon, the real panic began to ripple beyond the hotel walls. A regular guest, a wealthy financier who came in every Friday for a specific bottle of aged Barolo that I always had decanted for him, had apparently called for his reservation. He'd been told the bottle was unavailable. He was a man who did not like the word unavailable. He pressed the new, terrified sommelier, the cheap replacement, who, under pressure, admitted there had been a change in inventory. That was all it took. The world of high-end hospitality is a small, gossipy village. News travels at the speed of a text message. By mid-afternoon, my phone, which I had left on silent, was a solid, vibrating brick of notifications, emails, texts, missed calls. They were from the Suttons' best clients, the titans of industry, the quiet billionaires, the celebrities who cherished their privacy. They all had the same question. Is it true? Is the cellar gone? Is Thalia gone? To each of them, I sent a simple, standardized reply. The collection has been moved to a private, climate-controlled facility, pending the launch of a new venture. I will be in touch with details shortly. I wasn't poaching. I was simply informing. The loyalty of these clients was never to the Sutton Hotel. It was to the experience I had curated for them. It was to me. Reese had fundamentally misunderstood his own business. He thought he had bought a legendary wine cellar. What he had actually bought was an empty room and a lot of very expensive shelving. The first major blow landed around 3 p.m. Leo brought me the news, his eyes wide with a kind of awed shock. Mr. Chen, a Hong Kong-based shipping magnate, and perhaps the hotel restaurant's single most important client, had canceled his son's wedding reception, which was scheduled to be held in the Suttons' grand ballroom in 2 months. It was a $500,000 booking. His assistant had sent a one-line email to the hotel's event coordinator. Due to the departure of your head sommelier and the subsequent gutting of the wine program, we no longer have confidence in the Suttons' ability to provide a 5-star experience. That was the first domino. The client exodus had begun. These weren't just customers. They were the ecosystem that sustained the restaurant's reputation and its exorbitant prices. Without them, the 5-star rating was a hollow shell. The Michelin stars would be next to go. Reese had tried to trim a bit of fat, and had instead severed the restaurant's carotid artery. Late in the afternoon, with the trucks nearly full, Reese made his last, desperate play. My phone rang with a call from his personal cell. Out of a sense of morbid curiosity, I answered it. His voice was completely different. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a strained, wheedling tone. "Thalia," he said, the sound of desperation thin and reedy. "Thalia, listen to me. We need to talk. This has all been a terrible misunderstanding." "Has it?" I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. It seemed very straightforward to me. "Look," he said, stumbling over his words. "There was a miscommunication from corporate, a strategic error. We value you, Thalia. We value your expertise. We want you to come back." "You want me to come back," I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "Yes," he said, his voice gaining a hopeful edge. "We'll tear up that termination letter. We'll double your salary, a new title, Vice President of Wine Operations, whatever you want. We just need to make this right. We need you to call off the trucks." I looked at the last case of wine, a beautiful mixed selection of vintage Krug champagne, being loaded onto the truck. The movers were closing the doors. My severance package was secure. I thought about his offer. Double the salary, a fancy title, all the things he could have given me a week ago to show he valued me. But he hadn't. He had offered them only now, when his own survival was on the line. His offer wasn't a sign of respect. It was a measure of his own fear. "No thank you, Reese," I said quietly. "What?" he asked, his voice a squeak of disbelief. "The time for you to value my expertise was before you tried to replace it with a cheaper model," I said, my voice as cold and clear as ice water. "The time to offer me a promotion was before you humiliated me. You didn't make a strategic error, Reese. You made a choice, and now you get to live with the consequences. Goodbye." I hung up the phone before he could reply. The power shift was complete. He had nothing left to offer me that I hadn't already taken for myself. A few months passed. The silence from the Sutton was deafening. The initial storm of industry gossip had settled into a kind of morbid death watch. The restaurant, once the hottest ticket in town, was now a ghost ship. Reservations were easy to get. The new sommelier had quit after just 6 weeks, unable to withstand the pressure and the constant, unflattering comparisons. Reese, I heard through the grapevine, was a man besieged. The corporate office, furious about the financial and reputational damage, had him on a very short leash. I, on the other hand, was busy building. Mr. Chen, the client who had canceled his son's wedding, had called me the week after the move. He wasn't angry. He was impressed. "That was the most elegant corporate raid I've ever seen, Thalia," he'd said, a chuckle in his voice. "I have a proposition for you." He offered to be the primary investor in a new venture, a bespoke wine consultancy and private cellar management firm. My firm, we would cater to a small elite clientele, managing their collections, sourcing rare bottles, and hosting private tasting events. The centerpiece would be my collection, the heart of the old Sutton cellar, now the foundation of a new and far more exclusive enterprise. We named it Provenance. It was perfect. My office wasn't in a basement. It was on the top floor of a boutique building in a chic, quiet neighborhood. It was filled with natural light, modern art, and the low, happy hum of a business being built on respect. Leo was my first hire, my director of operations. His terror had been replaced by a quiet, confident competence. He was thriving. The final confrontation with Reese, when it came, was exactly as pathetic as I had imagined. It was at a large wine industry trade event. I was there as a speaker, on a panel about the future of fine wine curation. He was in the audience. He looked smaller, diminished. His suit seemed to hang off him. After the panel, he cornered me near the exit. "You ruined me," he said, his voice low and bitter. There were dark circles under his eyes. I looked at him, not with anger or even pity, but with a kind of detached clarity. "I didn't ruin you, Reese," I said calmly. "Your own arrogance did. You had a world-class asset, and you were too lazy to read the owner's manual. It was a trick," he hissed. "A legal loophole. It was a contract," I corrected him gently. "A document you held in your hand. You saw a list of bottles and their market value. You saw numbers on a spreadsheet. I saw a decade of my life, my relationships, my expertise. The problem wasn't the spreadsheet, Reese. The problem was you didn't know how to read it. You looked at the numbers, but you never understood the value." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Every word was a carefully placed stone, building a wall he could never climb. I gave him a final, polite nod. "Now if you'll excuse me," I said. "I have a business to run." I walked away, leaving him standing there, a ghost at a feast he was no longer invited to. It wasn't about revenge. It was about closing a ledger. 2 weeks later, an article appeared in a major business journal. The headline was stark: "Corporate Parent to Divest Sutton Hotel After Flagship Restaurant Collapse." The article detailed the disastrous financial fallout from the botched management transition and subsequent loss of its legendary wine collection. It mentioned Reese by name, citing his managerial oversight as the primary cause for the 9-figure write-down the corporation was being forced to take. He was fired, of course, erased as easily as he had tried to erase me. The system he believed in, the cold, unforgiving calculus of profit and loss, had turned around and consumed him. I read the article in my new office, the morning sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Leo brought me a cup of coffee. "Did you see?" he asked, a grim smile on his face. I nodded, folding the newspaper. "Consequences," I said. That evening we held the official launch party for Provenance. The room was filled with our new clients, the loyalists who had followed me from the Sutton. The air buzzed with excitement and the clinking of glasses. I stood to the side for a moment, just watching. Leo was expertly opening a bottle of 1990 Krug, the very one that had been in the last case to leave the Sutton. He poured a glass and brought it to me. "To the new Cellar," he said, his eyes shining with pride and gratitude. I looked at the wine in my glass, the tiny, persistent bubbles rising to the surface, each one a spark of light. This was my new reality, a world I had built for myself, not out of spite, but out of necessity. A place where my passion wasn't a liability, but the foundational asset. I had taken the most painful moment of my professional life and turned it into the cornerstone of my independence. The story of my time at the Sutton ended the day I was fired, but my own story, the real one, began the moment those moving trucks pulled away. I didn't just reclaim a wine collection, I reclaimed my narrative. I took back the pen and started writing my own future, in my own words. And I have to say, the view from my new office is infinitely better than the one from the basement. So that's my story. It's a story about wine, yes, but it's not really about wine. It's about knowing your value, even when the people who are supposed to recognize it are blind. They will hand you a spreadsheet and tell you that you are a number. They will use words like synergy and optimizations to disguise the simple, brutal fact that they think you are disposable. They will underestimate you. They will assume you haven't read the fine print of your own life. Let them. Your value isn't something that's given to you by a boss or a corporation. It's something you build, day by day, in the choices you make, the relationships you forge, and the expertise you cultivate. It's the intellectual property of your own soul, and you have to be prepared to protect it. You have to be willing to write your own provenance clause into the contract of your life. It's the simple, powerful understanding that your life's work belongs to you. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reminding the world, and myself, that I am not a line item. and neither are you. You are the architect. You are the curator. You are the one who knows the story behind the numbers. Never ever let them make you forget that. Don't wait for them to recognize your worth. Build your own cellar, define your own terms, and be prepared to move your assets when the time comes. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, if you've ever felt undervalued or overlooked, please hit that like button. It means a lot to know we're not alone. Leave a comment below and tell me about a time you had to fight for your own value. I read them all. And if you want to hear more stories about turning the tables and reclaiming your power, make sure you share this video and hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because everyone deserves to be the author of their own story.